Did you know that a single line on a map once decided who owned half the world? Back in the 1400s, European empires like Spain and Portugal didn't just sail across oceans. They claimed whole continents for themselves. But what made them feel they had the right to divide up lands that weren't theirs? How did a few treaties and maps end up shaping borders that still exist today? Let's uncover how colonial powers redrew the world map, set up empires far from home, and changed history forever. The first big players in the world-grabbing game were Portugal and Spain. Back in the 1400s, these two countries were sending explorers across the seas, hungry for land, wealth, and power. They were racing to discover new lands, places that were new to them, but home to people who had lived there for centuries. Portugal took an early lead, sending ships around Africa and into Asia. They claimed territories along the African coast and set up trading posts in India and beyond, creating a powerful trade network. Spain, on the other hand, looked west. When Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean, it opened up a whole new world for Spain to explore and claim. Soon, Spanish explorers were traveling through the Americas, claiming huge areas from the Caribbean to South America. The Spanish and Portuguese didn't just see these lands as places to visit, they saw them as resources to exploit, and they wanted to be the first to grab as much as possible. Their rivalry over land and riches set off a chain of events that changed the world, eventually leading to the famous Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided the world between them. So, with both Spain and Portugal eager to claim the world, things got tense fast. To avoid an all-out conflict, they turned to the Pope, who drew an imaginary line down the globe in 1494. This line, called the Treaty of Tordesillas, was meant to divide the world between Spain and Portugal. Everything to the west of the line was Spain's, and everything to the east was Portugal's. At the time, they had no idea how big the world really was, but they went with it anyway, trusting that each side would stay in its lane. This treaty basically gave Spain control over most of the Americas, while Portugal took over routes in Africa and Asia, including Brazil. Even though the line itself wasn't always respected, the Treaty of Tordesillas had a huge impact. It shaped how Spain and Portugal explored and claimed territories, and those early borders still influence the map today. Brazil speaks Portuguese because of this treaty, while the rest of Latin America speaks Spanish. This single line on a map, drawn in a time of guesswork, ended up shaping entire cultures and regions. Of course, Spain and Portugal weren't the only ones interested in world exploration. Soon, other European powers like France, England, and the Netherlands wanted a piece of the action. By the 1600s, these countries had built their own fleets and were ready to challenge Spain and Portugal's hold on the world. They weren't just looking for trade, they wanted to set up colonies, control resources, and spread their influence. France focused on North America, claiming large parts of Canada and territories in the Caribbean. England followed, establishing colonies along the east coast of what would become the United States and also claiming parts of the Caribbean and India. Meanwhile, the Netherlands built a powerful trading empire, focusing on the spice trade in Southeast Asia and setting up colonies in places like Indonesia. These new players didn't just go along with Spain and Portugal's division of the world, they made their own rules and fought to carve out their own empires. Battles over land and resources broke out around the world, leading to wars and alliances that changed the map over and over again. As more European countries jumped into the game, the competition grew fierce. The big empires of England, France, and the Netherlands didn't just want new land, they wanted a control over trade. Everyone was after valuable goods like spices, sugar, silver, and tea, which could bring huge wealth. To get their hands on these resources, the European powers didn't hesitate to fight each other, sometimes in actual wars and sometimes in quiet deals and alliances. They set up trading companies to do this, like the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. These companies were given a lot of power by their home countries. They could make deals, start wars, and even run parts of other countries, all to keep their monopoly on trade. The Dutch, for example, took control of the spice trade in Southeast Asia, while the British made big profits in India. This scramble for trade turned into a global competition, with each empire wanting to be the top player. These rivalries stretched across continents and even resulted in wars in places like North America and India. The world was becoming a battleground for trade, all in the name of profit. But while the European empires battled over trade, the people already living in these lands, especially in the Americas, paid the highest price. Native American tribes had their own lands, cultures, and ways of life, but Europeans didn't respect that. They took over indigenous lands, pushing Native Americans out of their homes to make space for settlers, plantations, and trade routes. One of the most tragic impacts was disease. Europeans brought new illnesses like smallpox that Native Americans had never encountered before. With no natural defenses, entire communities were wiped out and native populations fell drastically. But disease wasn't the only problem. European powers also imposed their laws, religions, and ways of life, forcing Native Americans to change. In places like North America, tribes were constantly pushed out, losing their traditional lands and resources. Sacred sites and hunting grounds were taken away, leaving Native Americans struggling to maintain their way of life. For a while, Spain and Portugal ruled the colonial world, but they wouldn't hold on to that power forever. Over time, other European empires, like Britain, France, and the Netherlands, grew stronger and began to challenge them. Spain and Portugal had trouble keeping up with the demands of controlling far-off colonies, and they couldn't match the rising naval power of their rivals. As these new players gained influence, Spanish and Portuguese dominance faded. Britain and France in particular were hungry for more land and resources and saw the old empires as obstacles. Wars in Europe spilled over into the colonies, weakening Spanish and Portuguese control. Eventually, the grip of these once dominant empires loosened, and they started losing their colonies to more powerful rivals. As European empires divided up the world, they relied heavily on maps to mark their new territories, but these weren't just regular maps, they were tools of power. Each line drawn on a map represented control, and with each new boundary, entire regions were redefined. Lands that were once shared among different tribes or local communities were suddenly claimed by distant kings and queens in Europe. These borders didn't match the local ways people lived or identified themselves. Instead, they were drawn for the convenience of the colonizers, often dividing tribes or placing rival groups within the same boundaries. This way of mapping out the world ignored the lives of the people actually living there. The borders drawn by European powers didn't disappear, they became the modern borders we know today. These artificial lines still fuel conflicts and divide communities. And that's it from us today. If you found this journey through history interesting, make sure to hit like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that connect our past to the present. Until next time.